Welcome everyone to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh Wrestleplex. Now, here is pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30-minute Midas touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony, and with me, as always, is my lovely co-host.
Oh, lovely.
Well, I try to add as many adjectives as I can sometimes. My co-host, none other than the mad scientist, Mark Tipton.
Oh, the mad scientist. I like that one as well. Although it does evoke visions of Paul Heyman, the mad scientist of extreme or whatever. But I do appreciate that. I like that one. As I do enjoy looking forward to what moniker I'm going to gain this week, the mad scientist is certainly a nice one. This edition of the 30-Minute Midas Touch podcast is one that I won't be able to offer much direct commentary on. But for those of you listening, to explain how this is a roundabout way to get into our subject, but recently the Oscars took place. Where movie awards are handed out. One of the aspects of the Oscars that came to be well known about the presentation of the Oscars was the red carpet. As the nominees and so forth made their way in, it was a bit of a fashion show to see who could have on what and so forth, and they were often critiqued on what they wore. And we, in this edition, are going to do a pro wrestling version of that, so to speak. We're going to be discussing ring gear and its importance and to professional wrestling.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said with the Oscars, not only red carpet, obviously, but they actually have awards in movies for costume design and things like that. And wrestling is very similar in that aspect. Professional wrestling, obviously it's based in an athletic contest, but eventually it morphed into this is a show business kind of thing. So let's make it as extravagant as we can. And there's been a lot of really creative things that come off that. Some really great things, some really bad things. But, we're a long way away from the old wool tights.
Yes.
That took place in the 50s and the 60s. But, gear plays a huge role in not only your presentation, but the presentation of your company, the presentation of in some cases, even your match. Because, imagine, just for an example, if Ryback wore a Speedo, like an actual Speedo,
yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it wouldn't have the same effect as him in the singlet.
No.
See what I'm saying? It would become comical.
Thank you for the mental image.
Yeah,
no.
yeah. But, that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of things that, the reason they wear certain things is because of like Ric Flair's another one, for instance. A lot of people talked about how cool it was that he used to wear his knee pads on his shins. Like, everyone used to mimic that too. I'll wear my knee pads on my shins like Flair. Well, Flair did that because he had small calves and he was trying to hide his calves, right? So for the most part, that's what the reason he was doing that. So a lot of these things all play in together.
All right, so it's fair to say that because professional wrestling is entertainment, much like in the movies or other forms of entertainment, the presentation is important. And you mentioned about the older professional wrestling, I think in the 50s and so forth. Oftentimes when I see tapes from there, unless I have to kind of struggle to see who is who. They wear basically the similar outfits, and with differentiating your ring gear allows you to stand out, which is certainly important to an entertainer. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to be unique, but at the same time, like I said, you want to follow whatever story you're trying to tell. Like, when we're telling our stories, it always starts with character first. Like, what would you, as, like, for instance, me, what would the Golden Boy Greg Anthony do? The reason that the Golden Boy Greg Anthony wears singlets is because I was always the wrestler guy coming up. You know what I mean? So it made sense for me to wear a singlet. And I was never going to be in WWE shape, as I say. So, it was a way for me to look professional without, going out there with my gut hanging out and things like that. So it served a purpose, and that's the way a lot of people do. It has to accommodate your particular body size, your particular body frame. Some people just don't look good in long tights because maybe they have high hips or something like that, and it makes them look like they have a 3-inch torso and 12-foot legs. So like all those things kind of play in a factor, and you kind of have to have someone that knows wrestling and knows what it's supposed to look like and what it's supposed to feel like to kind of give you an outside perspective sometimes of what looks good or what will work.
All right. As I said, I'm maybe a poor person to discuss this subject because I'm someone who's never laced a pair of wrestling boots in his life, although I have, certainly watched my fair share of matches. But speaking of wrestling boots, let's just start there. We referred to, let me think, one of the taglines that you've used here is grassroots and wrestling boots. Now, obviously, wrestling boots are the foundation for many people. However, not everyone in the ring actually wears what I would refer to as wrestling boots. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, obviously, a lot of people wear what's called amateur wrestling shoes. And then they wear kick pads a lot of times over them. I'm much more a fan. Surprise, surprise, traditionalist Greg Anthony is much more of a fan of actual wrestling boots, just because I think that is always going to be the standard in professional wrestling. But a cheaper option is the wrestling shoes, because you can get the wrestling shoes for $30-$40, and then you kick pads, you can find kick pads for $50-$60. You know what I mean? So under $100, and you've got your footwear taken care of. As to where if you buy boots, I mean, I have one pair of boots that's almost $500. You know what I mean? I have, some of my other pairs are $200-$300, somewhere in there. And I've had, over the course of 21 years, I've had 4 or 5 pairs of boots. So it's not, they don't, they last a pretty good long time considering how much I wrestle and things like that. I always had trouble at a high spots boots because high spots boots, for some reason, the eyelets would tear and the things like that very easily. So I haven't used them in many, many years. But some of the bigger named boot makers did a very well job.
All right. All right. Well, if you'll indulge me a little bit on the wrestling boots a little bit, one of the things I've always suspected is when you think of the traditional wrestling boots, they usually go at least up mid of your calf, sometimes higher depending on the wrestler. But I've always thought, is there a function to that in terms of support for your feet in some fashion, rather than just because the traditional boots go up higher? Is there a purpose behind that beyond the look itself?
Yeah, I mean, it was to basically give, like you said, give support. Here we are, we're professional wrestling, we're jumping around, things like that. So, there's now boots obviously used to be a little shorter. They used to be like right below the calf. And I'm not sure who. It had to have been in the 70s. Somebody got the longer boots. You know what I mean? That I remember. It could have been the 60s. I mean, it could have been one of the.
Well, sure.
Could have been one of the old Nazi gimmicks or somebody like that.
Yeah.
Some of the Vaughn somebody.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. It seemed like Jimmy Valiant tended to wear rather high boots.
Yeah,
he did. That was something, for whatever reason, he's one of them that sticks out in my mind for doing that, because when I picture him in the ring.
Now that you say that, I think it almost became like long tights, long boots.
Okay.
Because now that you're saying that, I'm thinking back, and like most people that had long boots like that actually wore long tights as well. And then people that wore the trunks usually had kind of the shorter boots.
All right.
And maybe that's something, maybe it's not. Well, could be right, could be wrong. Just a healthy theory.
Well, one of the other aspects of wrestling boots is the lack of tread on the bottom. Now, I've always gathered that has a practical purpose, because when you're in the ring on the canvas, that's great. The place I've always seen this come, and it stood out to me, is when matches make their way outside the ring, because sometimes the treads become an issue. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Well, when you're running on, in a wrestling ring, you're running on a canvas,
Yes.
and it's padded a little bit, obviously. So the whole point of not having treads is so your foot doesn't get stuck mid whatever, right? So it doesn't. So it's pliable enough to where you can move around, right? So if you go to plant and maybe, you don't turn like you're supposed to and you blow your knee out. You see, that's the reason we don't have treads on the bottom of our feet. That and you're kicking people, obviously, and you don't want to kick somebody and leave a tread on their face, legitimately.
Yeah,
but I mean,
yeah, that could be a problem.
yeah. But like you said, then and that's where you have to be careful when you do wrestle on the outside. If it gets slick or anything like that, and you have no tread.
Well, somebody has spilled their Coke on the arena floor.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we all had it. And here at the Herb Welch WrestlePlex, during the summer, our floor will sweat, because concrete floor will sweat, and it'll, it becomes a hazard. So we try to keep most things in the ring during that time frame. But, boots are, they have, all those things have practical purposes, the one thing that bothers most people about wrestling boots is the lacing the wrestling boots, because it's time consuming to lace and unlace your boots each time. It really is. So, like Bill Dundee one time talked about how, that's why he went to the slip-on boots, because he wears like the cowboy style where he just slips them on. That's the reason because he was tired of fucking lacing boots, so he decided to get the slip-ons, and I'm never fucking worried about it again.
Yeah, then you're done without that. And in fairness, lots of the kind of Western-based wrestlers, I think of, the first one that comes to mind for me is Dusty Rhodes. He actually incorporated his boot into the bunkhouse stampede, where you would receive a cowboy boot full of cash.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. His boots were part of his, and he always had very distinct boots.
Yeah, Barry Windham.
There you go.
They all have them, obviously, and that's something like we talk about. There's a blueprint for everything out there, and that's the blueprint for a cowboy right there. They have to have those boots. You can't tell me you're a cowboy gimmick, and not have some version of those. Even James Storm has a version of that, and he originally had that. So like, even our gunslinger Cody James here, he has those boots. What I mean? So I mean, it's one of those things like, and that's what we're talking about. Your gear tells part of your story. So that's part of the story.
All right. One of the things that has come up around, and I'm going longer on boots than I thought I would. And this has been a criticism I've heard leveled at people, or maybe advice given to people I've known in and around the wrestling business, in that having wrestling boots kind of gives you an appearance of professionalism.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, it is. I mean, and that was the thing. Like back in the day, you weren't, if you didn't have a pair of wrestling boots, you weren't wrestling. Now they may let you borrow a pair, but I mean, at the same time, if you came in and said I'm a wrestler, and then you put on whatever, they weren't going to let you wrestle unless you were a barefoot gimmick like Snooker or Tojo or something like that. But like, the boots themselves, it means, hey, I made it, that kind of thing. That was, I remember my first pair of boots, actually, this is funny. I loved Shane Douglas so much.
Really?
My first pair of boots actually had fringe on.
Ah.
Yellow fringe.
Okay.
So, and I had those on my boots for probably a year and a half, and then I eventually took the fringe off of them. But my first pair of boots, my custom order pair of boots from High Spots, like we were talking about, I had yellow fringe.
All right. That is something, because wrestling boots are kind of unique. They're not something you would see anywhere else. So I've always thought when I'm in the audience and I see someone walk out with those, it fits in that arena. Kind of, hey, this is.
Yeah.
And so it fits into that.
Also with that too, though, is not only boots are just more protective. Like the wrestling shoes, as lightweight and stuff as they are, like when you get thrown to the outside or you hit your heel in one of those, it hurts a lot more. So
Okay.
when you actually have an actual physical leather padded boot kind of thing, padded, it's not really padded, but you know what I mean, it's got the large sole on it, then it tends to take a much better licking.
All right. Well, let me ask, how do you feel about when people use really tennis shoes in there. Now, the one of them that comes to mind that I felt really worked, and this is a name I may cite again, and that's the case of John Cena. Now, in John Cena's case, when he came to the ring, he became known for pumping up, pump
Yeah.
up his shoes. It was kind of part of his presentation. And do you think it fit the way he performed in the ring, as well as his character he created?
Yeah, that whole Doctor Thugonomics thing. I mean, he wasn't. It has to fit, like we talked about. So I mean, he wasn't going to have come out in the throwback jerseys and the jorts and the chains and all that kind of stuff. Then all of a sudden, he just has traditional wrestling boots on, like everyone else on the roster. He was completely different than everyone else on the roster, so he had to be completely different. So like him coming out and wrestling in Jordans or whatever it was, or the pump ups like you're talking about, were the Reebok.
I think they were Reeboks.
Yeah. Whatever that may be, that was part of his presentation. It was a smart idea too. I mean, incorporating because he was a traditional guy. Like his original gear, he wore, biker shorts and wrestling boots,
Yes.
right? And he had bought like every color imaginable. So he had like every color tights and every color boot to match his tights, right? That's how gun ho he was about all of it. So for him to go, well, if I'm gonna have to wear shoes. You know what I mean? Let's make it mean something. And he, did the pump up thing.
All right. And I suppose for a visual, as though he wore those, I tried to imagine, well, could I ever imagine Kurt Angle wearing something like that?
Well, Kurt Angle did wear wrestling. He wore shoes that were very similar to that in TNA.
Okay.
Like he went away from his long boots like he normally did, and actually went to some actual like just plain white, and they weren't even really wrestling shoes. They were more like I said, like Reebok kind of style shoes. You'd have to look at them to see, but that was one of those things for Kurt Angle. It worked because he's Kurt Angle. You know what I mean? But he switched from the long boots to something like that. Like I said, during the TNA run, middle of the TNA run, I think.
All right. I'd like to move to something a little bit, let's say, more flashy and kind of stand out more. You mentioned the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Now, Ric Flair and fashion is something that, in my mind, goes hand in hand. But he, along with several others, kind of brought into vogue. Well, I couldn't say he did. There were people that did it long before he did. But I'm thinking about the ring robe. It's something that's not tremendously in fashion now. You do see it from time to time, but he is one who is most famous for it. Would you like to talk about robes and Ric Flair, among others, the importance they play in the presentation?
Yeah, I mean, those were huge deals, like when you saw Flair come out, or Tully, or, Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, and there was just a plethora of guys that had those ring jackets like that and those long robes. And Flair's were, by far, in my opinion, the most extravagant. Everyone else's were kind of, even Luger had some, but it was like just a black and silver kind of thing, I think, or black and red or whatever it may be. But Flair's were really over the top, and with the feathers and the rhinestones and designs, and just all the whole presentation of it. So, and that begs to differ. Could he have been the Nature Boy Ric Flair? Could he have been the limousine riding, jet flying, wheeling, dealing, kiss stealing son of a gun if he came out in like a blue jean jacket?
Right. It just didn't.
It wouldn't have fit, right?
No, it didn't.
But since he said that, and he came out and he had the robes, and he had the 7 girls with him, and he was the world champion, and he said he was a 60-minute man, and he meant wrestling, but he didn't really mean wrestling. He meant in the bedroom later.
Yeah, there were often allusions to Space Mountain.
Right.
And he wasn't necessarily describing a roller coaster.
Right.
Yes. We all understand that. And
he said it was the oldest ride in the park, but it had the longest line.
Yes. Maybe I need to move to something else. My admiration for Ric Flair and his promos is, to those who know me, I can go on that for some time. Another example of this, and when I thought about, when we just mentioned robes, one other vision that flashed my mind, I'll see what your opinion on this is. One of them I absolutely adored was the use of robes by the Macho Man Randy Savage. I can still see the image. He would always come out with his arms far to either side.
Yeah, his was more like a robe cape.
Yeah.
It was very unique, and like the way that he used to utilize, because he wanted it to be, like you said, like a big open canvas almost, and then he would have Macho Man written on it or have his logo.
The sunglasses.
Sunglasses or something like that. So it's something really big visually to do that. Anyway, now, he used to wear outrageous stuff like when he was in Memphis and Kentucky and places like that. But when he went to WWF, and this is Hogan talking. We've always talked about take stuff Hogan says with a grain of salt, but he says when Savage came in, he said he took him under his wing basically and found him the guy that made the robes, and said, we really need to get him some robes made, brother, like that. So Hogan takes credit a little bit for it.
He does say that, does he?
He does.
Where would professional wrestling be without Terry Bollea? In any event, I just always loved those robes because they weren't. To me, they weren't exactly robes because you could not. The arms were not clearly defined, and they stood out. And I guess what I liked was it was the way you described it. It was kind of like a billboard for himself.
Yeah.
He would come and spin around, and it didn't look like anything else, and stood out. And they are always so bright, and you could not ignore them.
Yeah.
And they were always rhinestoned or something.
Yeah. And that's what we've always talked about. Wrestling itself is. Moves and athletic ability and all that kind of stuff aside, it all comes down to being character and being somebody that someone can see and go, oh, wow, what's that? You know what I mean? And, that Macho Man obviously had that wow factor. As crazy as he was, you know what I mean? And then his gear was just as outlandish. You know what I mean? He's like, oh, who's the Macho Man? Look at him. You know what I mean? He looks like the Macho Man.
Yeah, he just
oozed it.
Right. It was just such a trademark for him that it stands out to me. If I could, I would kind of like to move more to ring gear as involved in the matches themselves, if I could. There are a couple of instances, and I can think of a couple of examples, to where items of apparel kind of became an intricate part of the match. And one of them I'll cite, let's say gloves, for instance. There have been instances where the coal miner's glove on a pole. Yeah. And then there would be wrestlers who, when they put on a glove, they were about to do a particular move or something that was a signature for them, and that kind of thing. Would you like to talk about things like that and how it can play into the presentation to the audience? Yeah,
like you're talking about, like the loaded glove kind of thing. Like, right. The guy would hide the glove for the entire match, and all of a sudden he put the glove on. And everybody, oh shit, he's got the glove on.
He's got the glove on.
Bang, he knocked the guy out, 1, 2, 3, and then, he used the glove again. And eventually it would come to where the guy went to use the glove, and the babyface would backdrop him out of it and take the glove off, and then he would knock him out with it, you know what I mean? To get a little bit of redemption. But there's been all kinds of stuff like that, too. There's been, even Greg the Hammer Valentine at a time had the shin guard.
The shin guard, yes.
And he would turn the shin guard around to use it as the figure four. It's like, he broke his shin or whatever. He injured his shin somehow, so we're going to allow him to wear this shin guard in his matches, and then he would turn it around so he could use it on the figure four, and it would obviously cause more damage.
Right, and then it became an unfair advantage for,
And there's a couple others too, like the ones that don't really get remembered a lot, but like Luger and Bob Holly both had the surgeries where they had arm surgeries and they had metal plates in their arm, and they used that as a finish. Now, okay. Bob Holly very briefly used it. Luger, they kind of alluded to it for a decade, but it really wasn't a huge thing. It wasn't like he knocked everybody out with it, but they would talk about how he had metal in that elbow from a motorcycle accident or something. So just further along.
All right. Well, I thought of this, and there was, for instance, one of the things I thought of the Dusty Rhodes again. There was a period of time, now he didn't do this always, but there was a long period of time where he would wear a red elbow pad on his right elbow. Right. Because what was he known for, of course? The bionic elbow.
Right.
And I love that presentation because then if he ever removed that thing, you're like, oh, no. Yeah. Now he's really going to get him.
Yeah,
and I really, as simple as that was, if he removed that elbow and then delivered that, oh, no, that guy's dead.
Right.
And I love it. It just plays into the showmanship.
Right.
Could you say, let's say, a similar thing. Knee pads. I've often seen wrestlers will lower their knee pad before they deliver a knee drop or something like that. Are those sorts of things the things we're talking about here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can use all that as part of your storytelling. Like Flair used to do that for years too. Like I said, he kept his knee pads more around his calf because of the calf thing. But yeah, he used to drop the knee without it. You know what I mean? And then every once in a while he'd miss it, and then the guy would put him in the figure four, and then that made sense, right? So yeah, it's all these things kind of play in with each other.
All right. If I could, I would like to turn back to John Cena. I mentioned I may come back to him. One of the great controversies, and something I've gone back and forth on, was, as silly as this is, John Cena, controversial as he is, one of the most controversial things was his in-ring apparel. Obviously, you mentioned he was known as he came up through OVW and so forth. He was known, I believe he was known as Cyborg at that time. Prototype, excuse me. It was
Cyborg.
It was something. He was it was almost, it portrays kind of like a Terminator thing to me or something. And as he came along, and for instance, when he made his debut against Kurt Angle, he was in those biker shorts that you mentioned. But then, kind of his trademark became the jorts, along with the t-shirt. And do you think that was a good thing to do, or do you think it was something that would just because of the character he portrayed, you think?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. There's been plenty of gimmicks that it wouldn't make sense for them to wear wrestling gear. Obviously, that John Cena Thugonomics thing wouldn't have made sense for him to come out in just regular wrestling gear like everyone else, because he would say he did come out in baseball jerseys, and then like the match would start, and he would just be in regular trunks and boots like everyone else, and then it loses its appeal. But obviously there's been stuff too, like Mr. Hughes. Mr. Hughes wrestled in long sleeve button up white shirt with a tie all the way tied, suspenders. Probably the hottest.
Yeah, it looked uncomfortable.
Yeah, same thing with IRS.
Yes,
he wore the short sleeves though because he was he's supposed to be halfway dorky because he was he worked for the IRS.
Could I put in an honorable mention?
Sure.
For Ray Traylor.
Yeah.
Both as Big Bubba Rogers and his career as the Big Boss Man.
Yeah.
In the prison outfit.
Yeah. What else would the Big Boss Man wear? I mean,
right.
it wasn't like you're going to put him in a singlet with a badge on it. I mean, that wouldn't make any sense, right? It had to look like a uniform.
And it did, and it really. I mean, that made that character. Even sometimes he would have like a leather...
like the leather belt thing.
Across his shoulder kind of thing. It was really a great presentation, and, you believe this was that, the bad prison guard from Cobb County, Georgia. That's right. Thank you. Shout out to Cobb County there. But that made a tremendous presentation, and that's really part of what it is. You're trying to get across to the audience who you are as the performer, and it really makes them memorable. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and it also comes back to the John Cena thing. Would it have worked with anyone else? I mean, there was guys like Public Enemy and PG-13, and like there was lots of people that did that kind of thing, but John Cena became a megastar, so he got that over. You understand? As long as you get something over, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like before we started the podcast, I was telling you about, I used to love the Jeff Jarrett gear. You know what I mean? Like everyone else hated it with the choker thing
and the straps
coming down the chest.
Yeah.
Everyone else hated it. I love that. I thought, that's unique. That's great. I love that. Same thing with we have a wrestler around here named Poker Face, and he used to wrestle with one leg.
Yes.
One leg.
As soon as you mentioned it.
Tights, and the other leg was a biker short.
Well, as soon as you mentioned the name, I knew where you were going.
Right.
Because I remember that clearly. I've watched him wrestle many times.
Yeah, but I mean, and then Zack Ryder used that in WWF some. But I mean, a lot of people have used that over the years. But that's just something I always found I liked and was something unique to them. Some people, like they have a good body. Well, they have a good body shape, but maybe they just, when they get trunks, they need to have them above their belly button, so it makes them look bigger instead of, having their belly hang out. So it's just a little, like Terry Bam Bam Gordy, he used to wear his trunks over.
Right, very high.
Dr. Death Steve Williams, same thing,
Right.
Those guys look like monsters,
And they were.
Fair enough, yeah. But at the same time, no one would say, those are just fat guys. You know what I mean? Like that would be completely... wrong in that scenario because those guys were able to kill just about anybody.
All right. Well, if I could slip in a little bit, that was one of the things that I went back and forth in my mind about John Cena. John Cena was obviously someone who was very known for his physique.
Yeah.
He was always kept himself in tremendous shape. He was known,
Yeah.
and so it always seemed odd to me that almost you might not be capitalizing because on his physique by having him covered up by the baggy jorts and so forth.
Right.
But
But we talk about too that wrestling. This is from one of my favorite quotes ever from Rick Rude. Wrestling is an upper body business.
Yes.
So people are talking about leg day, leg day, leg day. No, people are just looking at your torso, man. They want to see the big arms and the big chest and the traps like Road Warrior Hawk and things like that. So it's an upper body business.
Well, Rick Rude, speaking of ring attire,
Yeah.
there is a name who became quite famous for the use of airbrushing on his
and that's
his
what I'm saying.
wrestling
Like,
guys.
and you look at that, like Rick Rude got that over. So did Rob Van Dam. And then Ryback eventually, used it as well. I mean, there's been a plethora of people that use that too.
Well, the manner in which Rick Rude used it.
Oh yeah, because he used it for storyline purposes.
Because he would do the face of someone significant to his opponent.
Yeah,
And
the Cheryl Roberts one obviously being the
yes,
most famous.
Those stick out, and it's like, oh, he did that.
And then he did the one where I think it was him on one ass cheek, and then Cheryl Roberts.
And
then he
then he
clenched them
reflect-
together and they kiss.
Yes.
That was magnificent too. You see what I'm saying? Like that's good wrestling stuff. Like it's not vulgar, understand? But
No.
it's still got a little connotation to it.
It implied vulgarity.
Exactly.
How's that?
It implied vulgarity and the fact that he's hitting on another man's wife. He's
Very clearly.
very clearly.
Wearing the image of another man's wife on your ring apparel in the ring. If I know time is drawing near, but I did want to get in one honorable mention. You mentioned about someone getting something over.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm calling back to Dusty Rhodes with this. Dusty Rhodes was someone who was obviously known during his NWA and WCW days as a serious competitor. And then when he came to be a part of the WWF, he began appearing in the ring wearing polka dots. And I know a great many people did not care for including myself, did not care for this at the time. But I think it's fair to say that he got it over.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think they gave it to him as a rib. Like, oh, he's Dusty Rhodes. He's the Booker of Crockett. He's former NWA World Heavyweight Champion. He's this. He's that. Let's put him in polka dots.
Right.
Let's put him. We'll pay him a bunch of money. It don't matter. Let's put him in polka dots, and then we'll sell him on the polka dots. And he fucking went out there and, like you said, he got it over. Like, okay, watch this. I'm gonna dance and do all this jive stuff, and
I mean,
and
I
it
can
worked.
still see him and Sweet Sapphire.
Sweet Sapphire. Sapphire was a. She was a lady that used to hang around. I think they said the Kansas City area, and she would pick the guys up from the airport. She would go get them food, or like if they needed anything. She was kind of like just a runaround person like that. And then eventually, somehow, they thought she'd be good for that spot. So like she ended up, and I think she made some good money.
And she did a tremendous job.
Yeah,
with it.
I mean, she did. There was a mixed tag match with her and Dusty versus Sherry Martel and Randy Savage.
Right.
At SummerSlam, I think it was, or maybe it was a Mania.
Yeah.
I can't remember. But either way, yeah, and like you said, the polka dots, he got him over. Like even if it was a rib, if you turn around and get it over, then everyone wins, right?
Well, to this day, when people kind of try to pay homage to Dusty Rhodes, I often see the polka dots involved.
And the thing about that thing is like, it's one of those things like you see how powerful the WWF machine is sometimes when they're able to make that stuff synonymous. Like, do we talk about Terry Taylor now without talking about the Red Rooster?
It's hard to ignore it.
Exactly, because it has such a big the reach of WWE is so far. You understand? Like, so when we talk about Dusty, polka dots come to mind. When we talk about, Terry Taylor and the Red Rooster stuff, I mean, it's just, it just always comes back to that. But like you said, we're over time. We're never going to be exactly on 30 minutes. We'll always be a little bit over. We actually went pretty long on this subject, believe it or not. We thought we might be shortchanged on this one, but we actually made it work. So, for the Golden Boy Greg Anthony and my co-host, the Mad Scientist, Mark Tipton, thank you and goodbye.